And Maxime has managed to get a knight on d4, which means that we can expect a lot of trades in the center. Who would that favor in this position?
Well, it's essential that black clogs that d4 square, because you see there's one pawn on c4. If white could actually push that pawn where that knight is, you have such good central control that black would not be a happy camper. So you're clogging that lane. You're making sure that that pawn push isn't available. And as Tanya was indicating, there might be a trade on that d4 square, but I like what Magnus is doing. Trade on your own terms. Knight takes knight on f3 will not be very scary. You can simply take back. You have this bishop that is staring down into the black camp, and eventually you will be able to challenge for that d4 square. So I like the start of this game for Magnus. I would prefer to have the white side of this position, but Maxime, he's been rock solid in the center.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that Maxime was the first to surprise Magnus. If we go back just very briefly to the start, Maxime always, or nearly always, fianchettos his bishop. He normally tries to play the Grunwald defense, bring in knight out, pawn out, bishop to g7. Here, we transpose to a very slow type of position, which normally would favor Magnus Carlsen. So interesting that Maxime, maybe fearing opening preparation, switches things up, but catching up with the current position. I agree with everything Robert mentioned there. With black, you have to be really careful. This diagonal is just so strong. This white light squared bishop, if it ever opens up, will become the most valuable piece. So accuracy is needed at this early stage. And I've actually looked at this position before myself a long, long time ago. And I do remember that you can take this knight and try to plug the square with the bishop instead. Multiple approaches, of course, but Maxime needs to be careful. Things could spiral quickly for black. Not in a positive way if he slips up just once or twice, as Magnus makes a bit of a face there on the camera. And it's to do with your point, Tanya. Black has great grip on the central dart squares, but you can remove that. You mentioned especially black's dart squared bishop. Why not just go trade it off? Knight to a4, you're putting pressure on this bishop. The bishop cannot move because there's pressure on the knight as well. Once you remove this piece, black loses control, might be forced back. And as Robert mentioned earlier, if this knight is ever kicked away, pushing a pawn to d4, you build the Christmas tree. Actually, in this position, sorry, it's Christmas skies, so I'm just getting carried away here. It looks like you've got a Christmas tree again with white, the nice kind of formation here. And black's problem, the main problem, is this this naughty child, the black sheep of the family. This bishop on c8 is totally stuck, dominated by white's bishop on this beautiful diagonal. And yeah, I think all of these small things add up to something larger. And Magnus, despite his clock time, which maybe shows a lack of confidence after his Armageddon defeat, I think he'll be loving his position.
And it's a lovely picture here because we're often told to push our pawns in the center to take up space. And look, another pawn push towards the flank. He is just trying to gain even more ground, kick that knight out of there. Maybe knight comes to e4 rather than on the rim to kick that bishop out of c5. And when you fianchetto your bishops, those bishops stare through the board. They go on the board's longest diagonals. And those bishops for white, they're much better than the bishops for black.
Yeah, if things ever open up, if those diagonals are cleared, white's bishops will be archers, assassins from afar. And, okay, rook to d8 from Vasyl Lagrave. What is he relying on? Magnus's plan is so straightforward, so simple. Okay, he wants to trade off the pride and joy of white's position this knight, but white's knight surely is just going to land on this magical e4 square, hitting this bishop. Watch out for it sacrificing itself later on near the black king to blow open that flank. I mean, it looks like one-way traffic. It just feels like Magnus is in his comfort zone. Maxime less familiar with the structures.
Maxime hasn't developed his queenside. His rook on 8, that's just sitting there doing nothing. The bishop on c8, it's at home, can't even move. So this is not a good position for Maxime Vasyl Lagrave. And for Magnus Carlsen, this is a nice bounce-back game. It looks like he should be able to take it. Black's position looks miserable.
Magnus Carlsen has broken up the Christmas tree, but he's getting all the gifts into position already with the knight jumping onto the center. He does slow down a little bit, trying to also work out perhaps what he wants to do with that e5 knight. The one thing that you don't want to really allow are trades which would ease off the pressure. So taking on d7 only works in black's favor. You want to keep that knight where it is. If black was to capture, it opens up the f line for the rook to come into the game. I really like the suggestion that you guys had of the knight jumping onto the center of the board, and Magnus reaches out. He makes the move, attacking the bishop, any of that, and instead goes for a flank break with b5, and we will keep an eye on that one and jump back as black has made his decision. And meanwhile, there are decisions to be made in this one. Magnus Carlsen, he's decided to fall back with the knight, so not allowing any trades, and there is a big threat on the board. Those two knights are eyeing a jump on the f6. Look at the eval bar is Maxime about to get checkmated?
I was going to say, I think there's really one decision here, and it's when will Black resign? Because look at this position. A knight is about to land on f6. There's nothing Black can do about it. And it's not even just a piece sacrifice that's unclear. You could even take back with a pawn instead of going for checkmate and win that bishop on c5. So there is nothing wrong with White's position. It's a clean attack. That Black king, it's devastated, it's hunted, and it's going to tip over.
It feels like Magnus has been inspired by Wesley So, checkmating him almost in the last game, going for this kind of flash attack. Just he's gone straight for this Black king now. And for example, I mean, there's no obvious moves here for Black. If you just move a pawn, okay, he plays bishop to a3 instead. But same idea. I think you just land in a knight right now. Maybe this concept you mentioned, Robert, check. If the Black king moves, you can just take this pawn, come in with your queen. This is going to be disastrous. If you take the knight, you pretty much have to take the knight. Then I think multiple ways to win this. The one you mentioned, taking with the pawn, attacking the Black queen, forcing the Black queen to stay on this diagonal to protect her bishop. But now the White knight can just come in, threatening checkmate. I mean, this is just fatal. Pawn to h6. Now you deflect the Black queen. And once she moves, checkmate incoming. On g7, h7, everything. It's over.
Magnus has this incredible ability to just come back from a devastating game with little turnaround time. We've seen him make these comeback wins with his back against the wall. He lost to Wesley So in a game that just felt so one-sided. Then comes back, plays Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And what is this? Move number 18, completely winning. Knight f6 is a killer threat on the board. Maxime in big trouble. Has he made the move bishop a3?
He did.
Wow. Magnus Carlsen, if he goes knight f6, it's game over, and he's going to do it.
Yeah, he for sure will do it. But I think what David said earlier is true, that sometimes when you lose a game when you're not playing your best, that's when you're shaken, your confidence is no longer there. But when your opponent just crushes you like that, I think Magnus just respects Wesley. I really believe that's what happened. So he's not actually that deflated. He's like, well done, Wesley So. He's impressed, and he's also impressing us in this game because this is a miniature, it's over.
Yeah, I loved Magnus's interview with Danny yesterday where he was like, we're not done. Let's talk about those predictions. You only motivated me, if anything. And I think that loss to Wesley in the previous game, the first kind of blemish on his scoreboard in this tournament, I think it's really woken Magnus up, even pushed him to higher levels. And checkmate incoming, queen to b4. This won't change anything at all. White's queen, that pawn on f6 counts as an attacker, and the White knight joining in very shortly. Maxime's just playing on, praying for a miracle, but Magnus, after a bit of calculation, will land that killer blow.
And just to understand, how do you finish it? So the knight comes in, you're threatening a mate on h7. The only way that Maxime has is to run. Magnus is showing us the way. I think we can just sit back and enjoy the beauty of Magnus Carlsen's chess.
He's not even material down, and we see a handshake. Maxime resigns. Miniature, you called it, Robert. Brutal victory from Magnus Carlsen.